Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Clarice. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Obviously, we're dealing with the aftermath of, Woodhaven and everything, and obviously Clarice is getting her nails clipped because they're trying to see, try to get any DNA from the men that she scratched. And obviously, for her, she can't remember a lot of things clearly, and she's even telling Ardelia, it's like, no, I know what happened. It's like, no, you did, you went through something traumatic, I believe you, we're going to find him, trust me, we're going to get the person who did this to you. But the problem is, obviously, they bring in Dr. Lee to kind of hypnotize her so that she could clearly try to remember the person's face, but at the end of the day she couldn't because her world started bleeding together, like the trauma associated with Buffalo Bill, and now this kind of reignited that trauma. The trauma she hasn't fully dealt with Buffalo Bill, it starts colliding with this trauma, and so when instead of seeing the mysterious man in his suit, it flashes to sometimes her seeing Buffalo Bill. And it's so she's a little resistant because on some level she's kind of pulling away from it. And it's frustrating for her because it's she wants to jump on top of this immediately because for her it's if I don't do this now, things could, this case could go sideways. It could get buried in other in 2 weeks, this case could kind of get buried and shuffled away. So we need to be able to jump on top of this. For her, it's about the victims. There were 3 women murdered. Rebecca was almost murdered. Obviously, Marilyn, everything with Marilyn. And so it's just she feels like she needs to do this, to get justice for them. But Paula's putting her on leave, which even Ardelia, which I even love the whole thing from Escobar. He's I will shoot you if it makes you feel any better. I will shoot you if it just means you'll sit your ass down for 2 weeks, because she's I'm not shot or anything, but it's you've been through some trauma before. It's I wasn't shot or anything, I'm fine. And it's you're pumped so full of drugs. And even Clark's maybe you didn't experience what you experienced, because to them it's because no one can really know. And I think that's an interesting element of this show of no one can understand your trauma more than you, because you're the one that went through it. So to outside people, there's always going to be something else, because it's to Clark, to Paul, it's a situation of you were so hopped up on drugs that Marilyn pumped you full of, maybe you saw something that wasn't really there, that maybe on some shape or form it was your mind playing tricks on you, because obviously it played tricks on her in many different regards. So, which is interesting that while she was in there, obviously once again that trauma related to Buffalo Bill sparked out anyway, because she saw all those moths breaking through the glass and everything last episode, near the beginning. So I think it's a problem of, it's not just other people not around her trusting her. She also kind of is in a place where I think she's even questioning herself. And I think that's what's kind of driving her more insane, because she's no, I know what I saw, right? I'm not crazy. I'm not remembering things wrong, right? And that becomes another interesting element to this episode too, as Ruth, well, she went to Ruth initially hey, I want you to kind of put, kind of say that I'm okay to be back to work so I can get on top of this. But Ruth's no, I need you back at 100% and you're not there. So maybe talking to Catherine will help. I mean, you've been avoiding her the entire time, so come over for dinner type of situation. It was almost kind of I don't think she quite said it, but it's kind of implied hey, you do this, maybe I'll kind of sweeten the deal about, being able to make it so that you're not on that 2-week leave, that we can talk about your job and everything. So you scratch my back, I scratch yours type of situation. Which is, you can definitely see the elements of that is kind of messed up of yeah, I'm kind of holding your job in position so that you come see my daughter I've wanted you to the entire time. My daughter's wanted to see you the entire time. But even Ardelia being this isn't a good idea. You're obviously avoiding her for a reason, because you have not seen Catherine in a year. You've been avoiding her at every chance you've got. So you don't know what, obviously what effect Bill had on her and what that's kind of done to her, but you also don't know seeing her after all this time, what that will do to you. But she's no, everything's okay. It's oh, you're so okay that you're literally wearing 2 different shoes. So, but she goes there and meets B, who's the nanny and caretaker, which she hugs her because she's thank you for bringing her back, which I think you can tell it makes Clarice feel uncomfortable, because it's as she says it time and time again, I was just doing my job, and she's being treated and heralded as this hero, whether it's publicly of oh my god, you're the one that took down Buffalo Bill, you saved Catherine. And I think it's just more of a reminder of that, and it just makes her feel uncomfortable, because it's because I think she's had to deal with that for a year, just people always wanting to be up in her face about wanting to get an interview and stuff like that. But I think running into B like that just kind of made her a little uncomfortable. It was a reminder of everything. But at dinner, I think it's interesting. The moment she saw Precious, it made her freak out for a second, because I think for her, I guess she didn't know that Catherine kept Precious, which is kind of, I don't know, like the way she's, I don't know, but maybe just seeing Precious in general shocked her, but I think maybe she didn't know, which is interesting that Ruth didn't give you the heads up about that. But she runs into Catherine, you know, and the first time they've locked eyes since everything went down with Bill, and obviously Precious is over there peeing and no one's really doing anything about it. Like, obviously B comes over to clean it up, but that's about it. But dinner didn't go the way Ruth or Clarice was kind of expecting. At first it's kind of like a thing of like, oh, let's drink, and it's like, oh, you know, Catherine kind of apologizing about like, oh yeah, the way I was acting before, I'm sorry. You know, sometimes there's bad days, and that just happened to be a bad day. But she's like, you know, I'm grateful that I'm here. You know, it's like, at least, you know, I might be having bad days, but at least I'm not at the bottom of a well. And they're kind of like haha, like chuckling about it a little bit. But I think that's the thing for Catherine, where it's just kind of like, because for her, that's the thing. She feels like her mom can never understand. You will never understand what I'm feeling and what I'm going through. But obviously for her, she's trying to make it so like, oh, Clarice went through what you did. I think it's almost a thing of, look at Clarice. Clarice is, yeah, she has her issues, but look at her. She's out there in the world. She's kind of a little bit more put together than you. Like, I think she thought by being around she thought Clarice being around Catherine and her would kind of fix things. Because it's like, but the thing is, there's no going back to the way things were. After something traumatic like that, you don't snap back, especially after a year. Like, I mean, to be fair, like everyone, maybe because also you have to remember this show takes place in the 90s, so like there's a lot about PTSD and that we know modern day. There's no quick surefire treatment, and I think Ruth is expecting there to be some surefire like treatment of her being okay, and it's like, it's not something you just snap back from, like an experience like that. You know, feeling like, you know, not only being held captive, but believing like, oh, I'm gonna die, like being so cemented in your head, like fighting to survive, but also knowing like I'm going to die. You know, keeping the dog that you were threatening to kill just so Buffalo Bill wouldn't kill you. Like, there's layers upon layers of just all of it. And, you know, Catherine not eating, you know, I thought was kind of interesting. Like, she just put the food in her mouth, a little bit of it, but she couldn't. And so she's like, can you bring me my regular plate? And it ends up being like dairy-free yogurt. Because, as you know, Catherine, Ruth brought it up earlier that in the season that Catherine has lost a lot of weight because Buffalo Bill took her. So it was like she's like, I don't need to be a psychologist to recognize like the psychological implications of what that means. It's like, she felt like because she was bigger, that's the reason why Buffalo Bill took her. So on a psychological level, if I'm slim, like something like this would never happen again. But there was this powerful moment of, you know, Catherine, Ruth coming back and being like, I'm sorry, I guess this wasn't what I thought it was going to be. But then it's like, oh, look at you, Mom, the master manipulator. You manipulating me just like you manipulating her. She's like, what are you talking about? And Catherine said something I thought was so fascinating. She's like, if there's one thing in this house I own, it's my story. And you took that. Just like you're taking Clarice's story. You're trying to spit. Because what did she do? She worked her way up the political ranks. She is where she is right now because, you know, she tried, you know, she's saying that you took my story, and I think it's like you blew it up in the sense that like you took what I went through, my experience, what should have just been mine. You took it and you took that story as your own, and you kind of used it to raise yourself up this political ladder. And the fact is that I'm sure for Catherine, it is a thing of like your story is just like on the front news page, like it just. But I think I think there's that element to it, but more so than anything, it's mine. You took something that was mine, that was my pain, my everything, and you took it and used it to your advantage. And now you're kind of doing the same thing with Clarice. I thought that was so interesting. Even her saying, and I thought it was interesting too, because they immediately picked up this line of her being like, yeah, like, I immediately called for backup and stuff like that. And then Catherine had this look of like, wait, what? I was like, what was that look about? Because obviously we know she went into that not having any backup. So that's why I was almost like, you're wrong, Clarice. But I was like, maybe she was talking about after the fact. Like, because the way she made it sound at first, it was almost like she was saying like, oh, well, I guess she was implying like after Buffalo Bill died, she immediately called for backup. At first I thought she was kind of implying like she'd already called for backup ahead of time, or at least she was kind of lying about it. I guess she was always talking about after the fact, but the first time she brought it up, it made it seem like she was talking about before the fact, but we know that's a lie. like no one knew where she went. That was the whole issue in the first place, as Paul kind of brought up, like 2 episodes back or so. But obviously in Ruth's mind, it's like the person, she did this so that what happened, because she wishes what happened never happened, but basically saying that Catherine is so in love with what happened, that basically saying she's so in love with the trauma and the pain, she lives with it, like she just envelops herself in it and refuses to let any air get in, that she suffocates herself up. She's like, the place smells of it, both I'm thinking literally and metaphorically. Literally because Precious, a constant reminder of that, which is like, that's another element. You kept Precious, the dog of the person who kidnapped you. On top of that, you've also like letting it pee everywhere, so that smell is not, once again, not metaphorical, but also literal, of like that smell, you just live in it. And I think that's also the thing too, like maybe on some level she's suggesting that, like on some level, Catherine's letting Precious pee everywhere because it's just, she's enveloped in it, and you just see that like tear roll down her eye, because it's like, for Catherine, because her mom being like, I wish it, it never happened. And it's like, if it never happened, you would still be a junior, senator of Tennessee or something like that. So it's like, don't pretend like this is about me. Don't pretend that this is about Clarice. This is about you. It's always been about you. You made our trauma, my pain, what I went through, about you, rather than it's never been about me. Like, it's kind of what she's kind of feeling. Because it's also, like I said, don't think you understand. You're trying to get here, Clarice here, because you think she's going to try. Like, don't tell me you understand, because you can't possibly understand what I'm going through. She had actually talked to Clarice earlier about wanting to see Buffalo Bill's mom, and it's like, wait, what? No, it's like, yeah, I've tracked her down. I knew I'm going to go see her. Even really quickly, she knitted Clarice a scarf, and she's like, beforehand, she's like, I used to like to sew, but she's like, ironic. I know, it's like, that is messed up. It's like, I'm surprised you'd even be able to knit at all. I mean, I guess sewing and knitting is a little different. So I don't, I'm ignorant to like the differences. They seem about the same, but I'm sure there are many differences. So, but that is interesting. Like, yeah, that Buffalo Bill situation would make you reluctant to ever want to sew again. So I guess that's why she shifted more towards knitting. But Clarice ends up checking on Catherine and is like, no, don't do this. Trust me. I know you're not going to get the answers. But for her, that's what infuriates Catherine, because she's like, everyone acts like they know. Even you don't know everything. You act like you do, but you don't. You cried. I heard you. She's like, what? It's like, yes, after you shot, I heard the shots. I thought you were dead, and I heard you crying. Precious peed 3 times in that time frame. So it shows her enough, like how much time passed. And I heard you crying. You didn't snap out of it until I screamed to you. That's when you called for backup and everything. So it's like, you didn't immediately call for backup. You cried. You know? So I think for her, it's a situation of, she tries to make it seem like she was so in control. It's like, she's also like, what's it feel like to be so beautiful, were Buffalo Bill's last words. Like, I guess Catherine heard them because it was so quiet. It's so interesting, like, you'd be able to hear something like that, because they were a couple of rooms away, so the fact is you were able to hear that, but I guess it's just because it's so damn quiet, and I guess maybe the well helped funnel the sound down to her, like, for her to be able to hear Clarice crying, and be able to also hear Buffalo Bill's final words, and Clarice is like, wait, what? It's like, see, you don't remember that, so it's like, how can you tell me, like, oh, this won't give me the answers, because for her, she wants to confront him, because it's like, you played a role in him becoming the monster he was, you know? So for her, it's like, I need to confront you. I need her to see me, someone that was a victim of what he did, a survivor. I want her to look me in the face and know me and basically see who I am now because of this monster she created, you know? So I thought that was just such a fascinating thing. But obviously Clarice is like, aren't you going to stop Catherine? It's like, I'd be worried if she'd ever get past the elevator. And so, sadly, Catherine comes back in and she starts bawling. She's screaming and crying. And it's like, whoa, you want to talk about your job? And Clarice is like, no, not right now. Like, for her, it's like, it just kind of solidifies what Catherine was saying. That, like, I was just, you were just using me. It's like, I was using you for me and Catherine. Because once again, I think she's handled this in a wrong way in certain regards, but I don't think there's 100% an easy and right way. I still feel like how she's handled this has kind of been like, you have taken advantage of it, but I do see the thing of like you are trying to do good with it, but at the same time it does seem like, once again, it's a political game, so it's almost messed. It is, you can see the terrible in it of like you're using your daughter's trauma to push yourself up politically, and she's not completely wrong to view things that way, you know? So something as personal as her trauma, for you using it to make it a political chess piece move, you could see why Catherine kind of came to that conclusion. So things are kind of interesting on that front. Another angle to this is Ardelia looking into, like, obviously she ends up cutting her finger when she's like cutting lemons or something, and it gets her thinking about something else. So she calls up Al, finds out about where like evidence that kind of gets DNA checked like that gets tossed. She found the nails and she had them re-examined, but not under Clarice's name. And then they look and it's like, oh, turns out that the DNA was changed. Like there were more conclusive results. We never really got into the conclusive results, but it is like they did find some conclusive DNA. Probably no match in the system necessarily to them, but it's not as inconclusive as it was before. So it's suggesting that when, which I love that she's like, I need to talk to somebody from like VICAP, and then Clark kind of waves his hand. She's just kind of like, well, I guess you'll have to do. But now it's like, okay, so that means someone has the juice to make this disappear. Obviously, we've seen little by little that they've been able to shift and change a lot of stuff. So whoever this does have a lot of pull and weight amongst these circumstances. So that means that whoever it is was able to kind of shift out the DNA because it wasn't under Clarice's name. You know, Ardelia had got them retested just under someone else's name, so they weren't changed again. So now it's like we're going to have to keep this super in circle. They told Esquivel and Tripodi about it, which they were trying to visit the company of like, oh, we came here to talk about the company that Marilyn worked for, and it's like, oh, go see this particular lawyer. We could go to her about subpoenas and warrants and stuff like that, which they do, but it turns out like that lawyer, she wants nothing to do with this, at least now, because every attempt to take down like big pharma companies, she's like, I've tried to take down three big companies, and it just kind of backfires. Like my assistant, you know why she doesn't work for me anymore? They subpoenaed her 82-year-old grandmother, and she lost her health insurance, so it's like they play dirty. And obviously Tripodi had talked about that a little earlier about big pharma and everything, because like Esquivel was like, you think a medical company that's all about quote unquote helping people would just kind of want to jump on this and be like, oh, we have nothing to hide, so let's jump on this. So the fact is they're just kind of trying to duck and dive you and just kind of find a means of keeping you from looking too deeply. Kind of shows that they have something to hide, sure. But we ended up learning a little bit about Tripodi this episode, in the sense that we find out, like, obviously for him it's like the only medical wing that he feels like it's okay is the birthing, like, you know, where the kids are born type of wing and stuff like that. He's like, yeah, kids being born, it's a beautiful thing. It's like, he's like, you don't have any kids, right? And it's like, he was married. He had a wife that died from cancer, Sosie. And for him, it's like, she, you know, being the chemo and everything and what it did to her. It wasn't just, you know, making her sick, her turning green, what it did to her teeth, her hair falling out. For her, she was apologetic because, you know, for him, it's like the doctor's telling, it's like, no, you'll be able to have a baby. It'll be fine. Wait 6 months. Wait 2 years, maybe 5 years after you have, after the chemo, you have a perfectly fine baby. But then it's like, but there's also the chance that maybe the radiation will kind of mess up you having a baby, and maybe the baby might come out deformed, or like, oh, maybe the baby will only have 6 months to live. But it's like, and it's like for Tripodi, it's like the fact is that it was talked about like that. That is the thing of like, no, you'll be able to have a baby. Granted, yes, there's X, Y, and Z of why things could go wrong. But for him, it's like she was crying, not because of all that, but for the fact that she was apologizing to her parents and to me, that she almost like apologizing that she got cancer because she had cancer. That means there was the radiation also meant that she couldn't have that. She probably couldn't have kids with her, or that her parents couldn't be grandparents in that regard. And it's like, that's the saddest thing, you know? And, you know, Esquivel is like, you know, I bet you she was a beautiful person. And Tripodi's like, Yeah, and it's like, that was sad. And, I do appreciate that we were able to kind of get that insight to his situation. You wouldn't think he went through something terrible like that, like lost someone he loved like that, just because, obviously, like, everyone's carrying something with them. Esquivel's carrying stuff with him. Jabati's carrying stuff with him. Paul is carrying stuff. We get to his situation soon enough. But it's like everyone's carrying something. They just don't let it out, obviously. Well, Paul's situation in this episode is obviously the nasty divorce between him and Mandy, his wife. Well, the fact of the matter is, he talks about it later on. Mandy has a lot of pull. DC's her home turf, so she's able to kind of skew everything kind of in her favor. She has the connections and the pull to kind of make it so that Paul could ultimately end up losing the kids. And Clark is more so on Paul's side saying, like, get you a lawyer that's ruthless. Because for him, it's like, you put in the work. She's the one that's always looking for shortcuts. Because that was a big issue last episode, was because she was like, well, you're going to try to take my kids? Like, it's both of them had their issues, but for Paul, it's like, I'm more willing to, like, I have put in time and effort, and as Clark's kind of saying, it seems like Mandy's kind of found shortcuts to it and stuff like that. All of a sudden, he gets like home 911. I thought it really was work, but he didn't want to let on. But he went home and found his wife passed out. His son had called him and was like, hey, Dad, could you come in here and check something in my room? It was his mom. It was Mandy passed out. He didn't want his little sister to know. So I didn't want her to see. It's like, come on. I called to her. She didn't wake up. And Paul kind of calls to her. She's unresponsive. But eventually she snaps awake. It's like, okay, she's awake. But he sees and smells the glass nearby. She's been drinking, which he's like, his son's like, it's the pill, one of her pills, right? He's like, yeah, you're right. It knocked her out. So I don't know if they're aware. They might have been young at the time, so they might not know, like, Paul and Mandy's drinking issues, because alcoholism doesn't go away. It's not like go to AA meetings, you're cured and stuff like that. It's like any addiction. It's a forever. You're always going to be an alcoholic. You're always going to be an addict. It will always be there in you. It's just about, having the tools necessary to not rely on that drink or that drug. It's like, not leaning into your vices, essentially. But that's always going to be something you have to deal with for the rest of your life. It's not like you're a cure-all, be-all, and you never have to deal with it again. It's like, no, you're an addict for life. Is kind of, as someone who's never had to deal with that within my personal life, or no one who's really had to, just picking this up just from people you've heard talk about it, both on television, but, obviously real people as well. It just makes you kind of understand that. You can once again sympathize, unless you're in that circumstances, you can't quite empathize. At least that's how I look at it. But now this has kind of solidified Paul's notions of like how he wants to handle things. Like, because he had met with that dude early in the episode, and he was like, yeah, the fact of the matter is 80% of the like situations like this, the mother usually ends up getting the kids, whether or not they're the right parent or not. He's talking about like, hey, it happened to me, so Paul, I wanted to reach out and want to help you. The moment he got introduced, I was like, well, for one, hey, it's kind of interesting because the last time I saw him, he kind of played like a douchey character, a very not trustworthy character, and that was in the TV show Blind Spot. He played Madeline's lawyer pal. Like, obviously, he was kind of a scummy dude, so it's just interesting seeing that actor pop up in this kind of. But like the moment he popped up, I was like, the fact is that he was like willing out of nowhere to help Paul and everything. I'm like, I don't know, man. And then the moment he's kind of looking at Paul when he walks away, I halfway expected, like, the ending of this episode caught me as no surprise. Like, as Clarice is kind of reliving through things, she was able to kind of, with Lee, she was able to kind of, remember what Catherine said was right about her crying after everything with Buffalo Bill and what his final words said. So it's like, because it's like, oh, like, I'm trying to remember, maybe I'm not remembering things, which even Dr. Lee was like, of course you're not. Like, when you go through something traumatic like that, of course it's going to alter you're going to, like, the experience is going to tinge and, like, change things. Like, you never, and that's always the interesting thing, you never remember things exactly, you only remember the memory of them. And every time you're remembering something, you're remembering the memory of the memory of the memory, so on and so forth. It's kind of interesting. Like, once like someone put that perspective out there, I was like, that's such an interesting perspective that so your memories are never going to be 100%. There's always going to be like, there's going to be some differences because you won't ever remember the initial. Once you remember it initially, like I said, it just becomes a memory of the memory, so on and so forth, almost like an Inception thing to a certain extent. a dream within a dream within a dream within a dream type of thing. It's kind of what I'm trying to alluding to. But the moment Clarice kind of dig deeper and she saw the man in the suit's face, I wasn't surprised because I almost halfway expected during that dinner, I was like, are we going to find out that he's going to go back and sit down and eat and we're going to see a scratch on his hand? That's what I was wondering. But, I mean, who knows? Clarice probably didn't scratch deep enough to get his skin cells, like probably like some skin, but probably not enough to leave a wound. But Clarice doesn't remember the dude's face. I mean, she remembers the dude's face, she just doesn't know him. But obviously Paul is, asking him to be his lawyer. So I'm assuming his main reason for doing that, getting so close to Paul, is like, I'm reaching out because he's like, damn it, I need to find out what the FBI knows. Because Marilyn got nothing out of Clarice. Because truth be told, Clarice didn't know anything. Rebecca didn't tell them anything at the time because she was too nervous to say anything. So everything Marilyn did was kind of unnecessary because Clarice legitimately didn't know anything. And the same thing, but they still need to know what they know. So he's trying to get close to Paul so he can be at least closer to their investigation to be able to keep an closer eye on what they're up to and what Paul's up to. Or maybe he's going to try and also use some of Paul's personal issues to kind of deviate away from the case. I don't know. I'm sure it's more so the former, but it could be partially the latter as well. So a lot of interesting developments. I'm really curious to ultimately see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.